Hi, welcome to Delicious and Light. I'm Dina D'Ambrosi. We are getting ready for Thanksgiving. So today I'm going to show you a recipe I've been making for over 20 years. It's a fruit and nut stuffing that is really fantastic, that goes along so well with turkey. And if you're not doing it for Thanksgiving and just doing a special night, you can do it with chicken, pork, anything you like. You can make this easily vegetarian, and I'll show you how. There's a lot of ingredients, but it's super easy. The first thing we're going to start off with is 1 onion that I've chopped. And then I use 2 apples and 3 celery stalks, and I chop them as well. Then for time saving, I buy a bag of roasted chestnuts. This is 3.5 ounces. You could do anywhere between 3 and 5 ounces. And I just chop those up. The interesting thing is, years ago, this didn't exist, or we couldn't find it, and you could boil chestnuts. You just cut a little cross on them and boil them up, and then you peel them, and then you chop them when they cool. So you could do it either way, but nowadays they sell these pre-roasted chestnuts, which are so easy and so fantastic. I have a 1/2 cup of cranberries. I have 1 full bag, so this is going to serve 12 to 16 people. This is a 16-ounce bag of classic herb stuffing. You could use plain stuffing as well. You'll just want to increase the amount of herbs and spices you put in it. I have onion powder, poultry seasoning. I put a little nutmeg in there. Some people really like dried sage. You can do that. That's not my favorite, so I don't put it in there. And I have 2 cups of chicken broth. If you'd like this to be a vegetarian dish, so easy. I've made this with veggie broth instead of chicken broth, and it comes out really great. You don't have to remember the measurements to all of this, to this recipe. You can check us on deliciouslight.com. It's the video and the recipe will be right on there. So the first thing you want to do is preheat your oven at 375 if you're baking the stuffing today. This is the other nice thing about this stuffing. You can cook it up on the stovetop, put it in a baking dish, cover it, refrigerate it, take it out Thanksgiving morning, and then just put it in the oven. So it's a make-ahead recipe if you need it to be. So I have the oven actually preheating because we'll bake this tonight. Get a big old pot, turn it up to medium-high heat, and then stuffing usually has a very buttery, rich flavor to it. So I want to spray my pot with cooking spray, but I also want to add about a tablespoon of low-fat, low-cal butter spread to it as well. So this way you get the buttery flavor, but you're not getting all the calories and fat. So we're just going to add that to the pot, let that melt up. And from there, we're going to add our onions as soon as that is melted. So let's just get the pot heated. Also, you can check us out not just at deliciouslight.com, but we're also on Facebook and on YouTube, so you can check out any of these recipes when it's convenient for you. It'll be up there. So let's see. Just get this melted. We just want to put our onions in. So this was 1 onion chopped. And I'm just trying to soften the onions. I don't want to really brown them. I just want it so that they're nice and soft and they bake into the stuffing, and you don't necessarily taste, onion, but it's really mixed in with all the other flavors. So we're just going to let them soften for 3 to 5 minutes, and I'll be right back. All right. So the next step is the onions are nice and soft, but they are not browned. If you can catch it there. I lowered the heat a little bit. I'm going to turn it up. And we're going to add the apples and celery. And what this is actually going to do is add some moisture in the pot. And so I'm just going to cover this. And again, all I'm doing is softening the apples and the celery, but since they take such a shorter amount of time to soften than the onions, that's why I did it in 2 steps. So we're just going to let that cook for a minute or 2. And while we're letting that cook, I'm just going to do a little plug and let you know that if you live in the Northern Virginia area, Apex Leadership Company provides fundraising services for charitable organizations, youth sports groups, clubs, and schools. And we provide customized programs that would meet your needs. So if you live in this area and you're a part of a charitable organization or a youth group, youth sports group, contact us because we may be able to help you out with your fundraising. All right, so we're just going to let this cook for another minute or so, stirring occasionally, and I'll be right back. All right, so the apples have been softened and the celery as well, and we're ready for the next step of this. A little tip that I'd like to share with you all is if you're cutting apples and you're worried that they're going to get brown on you, and you don't want to use lemon juice because of the recipe that you're doing, you don't want that tang. What I do is I just drizzle a little bit of honey on my apples and it prevents them from browning. I've always seen lemon juice, but in a recipe like this, lemon juice might not work, and you may want to chop your apples a little further in advance, like I did, so that this way you can just add the ingredients as you need step by step. So the apples are nice and softened. I'm adding 2 1/4 cups of chicken broth, and again, you can add vegetable broth instead if you want. And at this point, you just put everything in. I'm adding the chestnuts in here, and I'm also adding the cranberries. Also, I just want to mention, many years ago when I first started making this recipe, I used to use raisins, and a friend of mine said, Dina, why don't you use dried cranberries? And I said, I don't know. So I tried doing that instead, and I love it. Ever since, I never went back. So I add a teaspoon of poultry seasoning to this. I add a 1/2 teaspoon of onion powder. And I add probably about 1/4 to 1/2 teaspoon of nutmeg. I like the nutmeg flavor in it. I think it gives it a nice earthy flavor. However, some people like thyme or sage. And if you prefer those spices, you could do that. I just really like nutmeg because we're using cranberries and nuts in this dish, and I feel like it's a great compliment to it. And then I just get out my stuffing breadcrumbs and stir this around. At this point, I shut the heat off and I look at it, and this is where you need to sort of get a good idea. Mix it in really well, and after you mix it, if it seems as though it's a little bit on the dry side, every part of the breadcrumbs should be moistened, and if it seems like some of them are staying dry and they're not quite moist enough, I add a little bit more broth. You can also add water, so if you don't have enough broth, you could just add a little bit of water in there instead. But this needs a teeny bit more chicken broth, if you could see that. So I'm going to get a little bit more chicken broth just until it gets moist. And I'll show you what it is I'm looking for. There's probably about another 1/2 cup or so. Let's see how that does. Yep, that'll do it. So it'll just seem as though all the bread has soaked that all up and you don't have any dry bread in there. All right, this is also a key part of this. Before you bake it, because it's difficult to add flavors later, definitely taste it and make sure it's got everything in there. You might want to add salt in here or pepper. That's perfect. So the heat is off. From here I just get a baking dish. And this is completely personal preference. I like to use a round one. Some people like to use a long one, but I like the deep round. This is what I usually cook it in. So I'm just going to spray this. Add my stuffing. I would say the most important part of this recipe, believe it or not, is just tasting it before you put it in here. Because again, adding flavors later, it's difficult to have them evenly distribute. but it's nice and easy to mix it up in the pot like this. All right, so we're all set to go. So here's the story. Years ago, I was making Thanksgiving stuffing, and my top broke to my Corningware. So you do want to bake this covered. So I'm just going to get aluminum foil. I'm going to bake this for 45 minutes. Then I'm going to uncover it, put about another tablespoon of butter spread on top, put it in the oven for about 5-10 minutes till that butter spread has melted, and then that's it. Then we're going to serve from there. So I'm just going to put this in here, and I'll put it on a lower rack. I'm going to set the timer for 45 minutes, and I'll catch you back then. Thanks. All right, so it's been 45 minutes. Let's get the stuffing out, and we're just going to finish this off. Be careful here. So I'm just going to remove the cover to the stuffing, and I'm just going to put about a tablespoon of butter spread on top of it. Put it in the oven for 5 minutes. Let that melt, and then that's it. And from there, you just serve her up. This is nice and fluffy. So I'm just going to add a little bit of extra rich flavor to this. And you know, honestly, if you don't have time, you're rushing around, the turkey's coming out of the oven, and you don't get a chance to do this, no worries. You can even just put the aluminum foil back on and let the butter spread melt right in there. So I'm just going to put this in the oven for another 5 minutes till the butter melts and the top gets a teeny bit crispy, and then she's ready to serve. That's it to the recipe. I hope you try this for Thanksgiving. We've loved it for so many years, and I hope you do too. Until next time, thanks a lot. Bye.